I'm Michael Diamond. I'm the academic director of the Integrated Marketing and Communications programs at NYU School of Professional Studies. And I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this call with the Wasserman Center at NYU School of Professional Studies. I won't dwell any further on our courses and what we do. You can check us out on the web. But I want to jump right into our distinguished panel. We're joined by Jennifer Scott. Jennifer's been one of the leaders at Ogilvy and wonderful places like Edelman. For many, many years, he was the managing director of the New York office, has headed up global thought leadership. And she'll give us a little bit of a fuller sort of intro to how she got where she is. Scott, who joins us from the MBA, is a faculty member, as Jennifer is, at the school, teaching a digital marketing program, and heads up digital initiatives and a lot more at the MBA. Kathy Cuevas, who is a new friend to the school and absolutely delighted to welcome, is at L'Oreal, managing very broadly university relations and sort of a kind of interesting position around branding the company to external audiences like college students and universities, and she'll tell us a bit more about that. And Jamie McLaughlin is a good friend of the school, has been on campus a couple of times, and is a very well-respected and noted, and may I say dapper recruiter of PR talent. The last time he joined us, he was wearing extraordinary rosettes, I think. So anyway, we're very, very happy to have him back and kick this thing off. So I guess what I would ask you all, we can kick off with Jennifer if you like, briefly, just to say like how you got to where you are, and maybe if there are one or two things like real strong skills that you think stood out that helped you get to where you are.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So I'm actually an immigrant to America, and I came here directly after I finished university, with stars in my eyes, looking for a job. And it was during one of our past recessions, and I applied for 40 jobs, and I had no luck. And I was about to despair because I really wanted to go to Washington and be part of a think tank in Washington, and they were not interested. And what happened over time, over the months that I was desperately looking for a job, I got to know people. And it turned out that actually those people were the key to helping me find an opportunity, which turned out to be in New York. It turned out to be a job working for a research company that did research for strategic communications. I had no idea what the job was about, and I decided just to take it. And I entered on the bottom rung. And it really began, when I look back, a remarkable career. And I think the lesson to learn is, you know, for everybody trying to grow in the job market, break into the job market, get to know people, build relationships, and then don't wait for the perfect job. Just go and take something that looks like it has potential. And once you're in, leverage that opportunity, which is what I've done my whole career. And I've been able to grow something that's been enormously satisfying and rewarding. So.
Fabulous. How about we go to Scott, actually? Maybe you could, are you a sports guy? Is that what got you into the MBA, or more a digital guy?
Yeah, it's interesting because I started my career actually as a sports journalist, and I was lucky to get a job right out of high school covering pro sports, whether it's it was the Yankees or the Giants, or I was this 19-year-old kid going around interviewing people like Tiger Woods and Derek Jeter, and I was in college, and everyone's like, trying to become a journalist. I'm like, but that's what I'm doing already, today. And then I started to realize that I wanted to do TV, I wanted to do radio, and kind of that full gambit. And ultimately, I realized that I didn't want to move around the country and be a TV guy. And I loved my family too much, so I didn't want to move around the country that much. And then I started to see this convergence of traditional and digital media where TV was moving online, radio was moving online, print was moving online, and I started just learning more about that space and how to create content there. So recognizing that pivot really pushed me towards the digital space. And then I would say that the second kind of pivot was, this is my second go around at the NBA. I was there from 2009 to 2011, and I left to go over to Ava's Budget Group and head up content marketing for them. And the last thing I was doing at the NBA was kind of like just the start of mobile and apps and consuming NBA games through the App Store, whether it was Apple or Google. And when I took this web role at Avis, I was like, you know, this is fine, but this isn't the future. Mobile is the future. And so I spent my nights, my weekends, you know, mornings, as much time as possible, learning about how to create, market, develop, everything around apps. And I taught myself enough to create a word game that went on to be a top 100 word game in 105 countries. And from that opportunity, Avis eventually had an opening for someone to head up mobile marketing and strategy, product strategy, that I had built up my resume outside my 9-to-5 to take that opportunity. And within 9 months, the New York Times called and asked me to come lead mobile for them. And so, you know, if I never, again, you know, one of the biggest things I tell my students in the classroom is like, you got to create opportunities. That first job or that job that you're in today might not have all the areas of interest that you have, but you have all these other hours out of the day that you can create, you know, these opportunities that can ultimately show that you have experience in these areas for someone to hire you, because you can't just say, I want to do it and not show that. And this ultimately is what led me to the NBA, where I head up all the immersive emerging technologies, whether it's AR or VR or how fans consume the game of basketball moving forward, you know, thinking about levels of interactivity on top of the game or our fantasy and betting experiences. So each one has really been around recognizing industry pivots and capitalizing on them.
Fantastic. It sounds like some things we're going to come back to later about your side hustles and sometimes how your side hustles can become the main thing. So, Kathy, love to hear your story.
Sure. So I have over 20 years industry experience, ranging from working for universities, big banks, startups. But I spent most of my career between American Express and L'Oreal. And the start of my career, I was the traditional liberal arts educated person who thought they were going to go to graduate school and do big things. But life had other plans for me. And so the sort of key skills that I leveraged were, you know, to be curious and to be flexible. So when it comes to career pathing and taking, you know, taking this journey, careers these days are more like spider webs versus ladders. It's really about looking at tangential opportunities. What are you going to gain? What value you can bring to the organization? And, you know, I am a theater buff and an improv fan. And so I like the concept of yes and, which is something from improv where, you know, you take that leap of faith and you say yes to your scene partner and build upon that. So for me, the career opportunities that led to my current role at L'Oreal were all about, you know, saying yes to an opportunity and building upon that, getting the, you know, taking the next step, learning a new skill. I spent 10 years at American Express before L'Oreal, you know, learning digital marketing on the job when digital marketing was not a thing. When companies were thinking about Facebook and were like, what do we do with that? Back in the day. And now you can see there's this whole new discipline. And particularly with marketing, there are emerging technologies, emerging skill sets that you constantly have to be flexible, curious, and be agile. So those are the things that have really helped me in my career and have led me, you know, to my current role at L'Oreal.
Fantastic. And I think it sounds like a theme is already emerging around sort of agility and a lack of linear, you know, progression in people's careers. So Jamie, you look at a lot of talent. So it'd be interesting, both, you know, maybe you can talk to us about how you got to where you are, but, you know, maybe also a segue into some of the things you're starting to look for in emerging talent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, full transparency, I wasn't dreaming of being a recruiter when I was growing up in London. I kind of fell into it. You know, maybe back to Jen's point of, you know, taking something that, you know, came along, and I wasn't very good at it, to be honest, for about a year. But I learned the hard way from my mistakes, but that's, you know, that has helped me. That has helped me know, you know, exponentially and throughout my career, and also, you know, when training and developing people as well, because, you know, I don't think I had the, you know, correct training and development early in my career as well. So that's something I've taken a real passion for later in my career. I worked in London for the first sort of 10 years of my career, and then I moved to New York in 2014, and that's really where I would say my career took off. And that's down to a couple of things. One is I'm very stubborn, and that can sometimes be seen as a negative, but it can also mean I don't take no for an answer. I often believe in myself when others don't, and I'm very determined. But I think the US fits me very well because Americans are instinctively entrepreneurial and very, very strong networkers. Again, Jen mentioned that before, and they're very, you know, they keep their networks open. Brits maybe hold them onto them a little bit more. So I really capitalized on that. And my job essentially is networking. There's some other stuff to do with it, but it's, you know, it's networking in terms of finding the right clients and finding the right candidates. So using your networks and expanding your networks is vitally important. And I think that goes for marketing and communications as well. I think everyone has mentioned how, you always need a leg up. You always need a mentor. You always need someone who's endorsing you and a sponsor. So I think using your network and developing a network is critical to all careers, but especially mine.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just sort of stay on that theme? We'll come back and talk about some sort of more generalized themes around trends, but let's start building off of what Jamie was talking about, and all of you. What do you think then? And recognizing most of our audience is probably emerging young professionals. They are most likely probably to be taking some entry level jobs in PR and marketing. So, what do you think? Stick with Jamie, and then we'll move it around. What do you think are some of those skills that you think are absolutely critical for students, or young emerging professionals, and also sort of maybe perhaps some things that you reflect they don't really teach very well at universities. So
yeah.
What could we be doing better? So.
Yeah, in terms of skills that are essential, particularly in marketing and communications, which I focus a lot on. It felt like it was becoming a little bit of a forgotten art, but writing has had a little bit of a resurgence of late, particularly with the need for internal communications, employee communications, corporate messaging, CEO communications, that sort of area. So writing is vitally important to a career in marketing and communications. But on the flip side, I think a lot of employers, when they're hiring entry-level people or junior people, will be looking as them almost as evangelists for new media, whether that's data and analytics and AI and VR and all these acronyms. So I definitely think that's that's a big element, and maybe a thing that's underlooked a little bit, but marketing and communications, bottom line is it's about sales. So people who are strong presenting, strong pitching, commercially minded, that, if you can exhibit that, then I think that's something that might not immediately think about when you're applying for a marketing or a communications job, but people who are commercial, it's not the be all and end all, and people have other skills, but definitely people who are strong presenting, strong pitching, commercially minded, that's something that can go far, and that's kind of something you can exhibit early in your career as well. You can have worked in a sales job. One thing I didn't mention was when I was during my time at college, I worked in a call center doing telesales, which is awful. The phone would dial itself and you would just be put through to someone. But it sharpens your senses no end when you're making 80 to 90 calls a day, and sharpens my career ambitions that I didn't want to continue doing that for the rest of my career as well. So I think that sales element always rings true.
Very helpful. Kathy, I actually want to see if I can bridge to a question for you related, which is the balance of sort of creative and analytical skills. Because, I would imagine in a place like L'Oreal, it has to have the most extraordinarily creative, smart, people, with perhaps a bent or an energy towards more subjective and expressive things. And but it's also a business. It's clearly a business. So when you're looking for people, what sort of skills do you think are making, and are you looking for, and how do you balance those two? How do you think people should balance those two sides of themselves?
Yeah, I think, marketing today looks very different than the world of 10 years ago. With the proliferation of digital, we have so many data points on our consumers that it's so important that modern marketers are bringing a comfort level with data to the table. They have to be comfortable with databases, spreadsheets. How do you look at numbers and generate an insight that will help drive a decision to market to a consumer? So that is a critical, foundation now of marketing. And the creativity, I think, what people would traditionally think of as creativity, the land of working with the agency on the concept and the excitement of the influencer, and working on those sorts of campaigns. Of course, that's still part of it. But even to get to that point, you have to be grounded and centered in who your end user is. If your customer, your consumer, your business partner, whoever that is, understand them inside and out, understand the dynamics and the data of the marketplace, because that's how you're going to make the most optimized decisions for your eventual campaigns, which will then drive the sales or whatever objective you have, for your business. So that's sort of you do have to have both. But if you don't have the analytics, creative is only going to get you so far.
And I love this idea of, we talk about it at the school, two things we talk about. One is that, we believe marketing and communications is a human-centered and data-driven activity. Yes, I mean, that we try to emphasize both sides of that equation. But the other is this idea of developing actionable insights, which I think is a tremendous counsel to our students. Scott, I want to pick up perhaps on the digital side. Classically people, emerging professionals feel that they have to have all these digital qualifications, they need all these certifications, what have you. What do you? And then there's an argument that says, like some of these things we can teach. We're looking for more fundamental, critical thinking and stuff like that. Where do you net out on digital readiness, and what kind of skill sets do you think students absolutely need, or people navigating the job market today versus things you could pick up perhaps?
Yeah, I would say. Obviously, the analytical side is extremely important, but the side of that I find the most value is the storytelling out of it. You can't just dump a spreadsheet, or especially storytelling as depending on who the audience is. As you get more senior, you can't just dump a spreadsheet on someone and expect them to, the story is behind the data that you're trying to get across is really important. I think communication, making sure that I constantly stress to my team here at the NBA, simple, like get to, especially at a time like this where it's absolutely crazy, big deep paragraph emails on updates of what we're working on are not going to be read. I don't even read them, and it's my team. Short bullet points, figuring out like what the most important thing to get across is especially as, again, who your audience is throughout that process. I think versatility is extremely important now, especially as you're seeing some companies operating pretty lean, or not doing as much hiring. So they're looking for more generalists than specialists. At the New York Times, we are a very specialist organization where we had a lot of product roles where you had every single component of the digital product had a product manager, a project manager, an analyst, a designer, across the board, and you were focused on one thing. Here at the NBA, we're, you as an individual, we're a large organization, but we run pretty lean, and you as the individual, as a product manager, also sometimes serve as the analyst and the project manager as well. So having that versatility is important. And then the fourth thing that I'll say is, I think relationship building, figuring out how to get things done, and not just doing it in a silo and going to someone when you have an ask, but building up that relationship before the ask to know that you actually are trying to nurture that component of working together, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, well, those, a lot of good points that I think we try to reflect, and I know our colleagues at Wasserman Center have spent a lot of time, talking about some of these things. The brevity is important. I shared with you all, I think, introduced recently to the TLDR. Too long, didn't read. So that's the TLDR is now goes at the top of most of my documents when I feeling a little lengthy in tone, but. Yeah, and this other question about lean and agility and the balance of skill sets seems really critical, more so than ever. Jen, I want to pick up on one topic perhaps for you, and then I think if we could pivot as a team to sort of broader trends, and then we'll come back to some more specific questions about the process and getting a job and cover letters and things like that. But so to you, Jennifer, I know that you, in your role, have really spent a lot of time thinking about quite big thoughts, big issues, thought leadership, and I also recognize that a lot of our emerging professionals are thrown into jobs where they're not only expected to sort of know the basics, but also to be thinking big thoughts already. I get feedback from students, which is like, how do I know what to say about X, Y, and Z? I've just started here, So I'm wondering, any counsel from you about, how you think people can start developing more holistic views, more critical thinking, just a way of navigating the world that suggests, hey, I'm not just good at the what we call brass tacks, I guess, but I'm also I'm thinking about this. I've got a larger point of view.
Yeah, what I will say, Michael, is that many folks just entering the workforce are often regarded by the more senior folks like me as kind of implicitly, just because of their age, geniuses in terms of new technologies and emerging forms of engagement. And so what we tend to do is kind of funnel them in there and say, okay, you understand this, go. And that's great. But what it does, to your point, is it can lead to a kind of myopic perspective, like I'm just managing the social media accounts for this client, And so what I would encourage folks who are new in jobs, who are finding like the pace of the work, particularly if they're in public relations and communications, it's very intense, who are being focused on these new forms of engagement, just keep always asking yourself, and don't be afraid to actually verbally ask your team members and your senior team members about what the overarching objective of whatever project you're doing is. What are we really trying to achieve here? What will the client see as success? What's a win coming out of this? Because everybody on the team has to keep checking themselves against those primary assessments. Everybody. And if you're even a junior member asking those questions respectfully, thoughtfully, you will elevate the game of everybody, and it will also help you to balance the sort of intensity of your daily work with a much broader sense of, okay, this is where I fit in the big strategy. This is where this week's project is going to add to the overall success of this account. And that will not only help you be happier and more valuable to your team, but I think it will actually turbocharge your career, because you will start to be seen as a person who is not only good at the day-to-day and getting things moving, but also as somebody who can juggle that with a broader perspective. It's not easy. It took me a long time to learn this, but I really encourage folks, as they're starting work, keep asking those big questions.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to do a tiny bit of housekeeping here. We now have a good large crowd of folks who've joined, and I want to apologize to those who had some trouble getting in. I think this is our first webinar post some changes in the technology at Zoom, so we apologize for that. And I also want to let everyone know that the Zoom is being recorded, and we'll send out the link to that post the call. So if you feel you missed anything along the way, please hang in there. And then my third quick bit of housekeeping is actually to our panelists. And don't feel obliged, but if we can go beyond 12:30, I think it might be nice to keep going. If you have to drop, please just drop. But otherwise, I'll probably take us another 15 minutes beyond 12:30, if that's okay with you. All right, so I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about some major trends. I think it's probably a good build from where you were, Jennifer talking about, where does this fit in to the larger picture? And, I firmly believe that sometimes the solution, many people on this call are probably interested in incredibly pragmatic questions, like how do I get a job? And, how do I, I've been laid off and how do I pick that up? And I think those are things we'll get to in some very practical ways, but I also think it's worthy of encouraging people to think about the problem a little bit more broadly and think a little bit about where are some of the big trends and opportunities, perhaps. Yeah. So I'll stay with you if you don't mind, Jennifer, and just say in the field of PR, perhaps, where just the world you've lived in for the last several years, where do you see agency or brand, where do you see some of the growth areas? Where do you think if you were entering this career today, you'd say, hey, that looks like an exciting place to be. That's a big trend in our industry.
Yeah, two things. The first is I would look very closely at corporate communications just within PR, right? So, you can go into consumer, you can go into, I don't recommend it right now, hospitality and travel. But what I'm seeing is that at the corporate level, the need for excellent communications, the need for excellent thinking about who are we as an organization? What are our values? What is our core messaging? And who are our target audiences? And how do we effectively get our message out to them? Recent events have disrupted everything. And so the opportunities to do exciting work for organizations, corporations, institutions, as they reset, as they pivot, as they start to realign themselves to the new reality that we're all getting used to, I think that's an incredibly exciting area to go into. And in order to succeed in that area, and this is the second thing, I think if you're trained in public relations or you're trained in marketing or trained in advertising, you obviously have a skill set located there. But what we're seeing in the industry, particularly on the agency side, is that all these skills are merging. So, you look at Ogilvy, you look at Edelman, they talk across all these things. So even if you want to focus on PR and corporate communication, having a familiarity and a facility with the basics of how advertising works, the role it plays, marketing is enormously valuable to you going forward, because this is starting to merge and you need to hold your own and you need to contribute in context. So going in with that ability, I would strongly recommend. Excellent.
I know, Jamie, do you want to pick that up at all about some of the things, maybe ask in a very pragmatic way, which is, are the requests to you as a recruiter coming out of new areas? Are there places where people are saying, Jamie, go find me one of these. I need, this is an area that needs support.
Well, I think Jen's been reading my notes because I was going to answer pretty much everything she said is what I was going to say. If we drill down a little bit on the corporate comm stuff and the integration, which is absolutely correct. Employee communications is huge at the moment. Probably shouldn't say it out loud, certainly not if I'm being recorded, but employee communications used to be a little bit pushing out a benefits email once a month, telling them, changes, that kind of thing. And now it's sophisticated, it's on the front line, it deals with, if you have an issue with employees, it resonates much more than a disgruntled customer quite often. So, and then even more so when you've got a disparate workforce, when you've got a workforce looking for guidance from the CEO about pandemics, about Black Lives Matter movement, all of these things. So I think if we're drilling down on the corporate communications thing, employee communications is even more important today, but it's also even more sophisticated, which I think's great. And then in terms of things that we're being asked for, we've mentioned it, Kathy mentioned it, I've mentioned it, Scott, of course, can talk about it, but around new media, particularly data and analytics, it's just so important. And I think it's great that it's in our industry, because often marketing and communications is a little bit abstract. It's a little bit, what was the impact? But if you've got data and analytics driving thought and driving change, and then showing the impact of a campaign, then I think I think it's fantastic that if we can use these tools, it can add, it can add worth to marketing and communications as well.
Kathy, can I ask you, from L'Oreal's perspective, a global company, a position in lots of, different categories, perhaps broadly aligned, but, you're in lots of spaces. Are there things you're seeing, that the company is saying, we need to move in this direction, or we need more, talent in this space, or things like that? So, how do those trends filter through for a company like L'Oreal?
Sure. I think any consumer goods company is really seeing a rise in e-commerce and e-retail. So, these are the functions of the organization. They're sort of a blend. You could come at it from a marketing lens. You could come at it more from a digital technology lens. But ultimately is, how do we drive communication and sales of products through our owned platforms or through our partner platforms like in Amazon or Sephora. So this is, in high demand, particularly now with COVID and the fact that all these companies really had to pivot, from, driving sales or relying too much on a retail model and in store to a truly online experience. So this is just booming. It's booming for us at L'Oreal, but also any company that's that's reaching out to consumers is looking for talented people who can help build out e-commerce disciplines and departments in their organization.
Fantastic. A great segue to Scott, maybe. And you guys have not been able to sort of have the events live, and that's caused a lot more activity online and live streaming, and we know all these various streaming wars now with Disney and Netflix, etc. What do you think students of marketing and PR or people navigating this profession, is there something unique about what's going on online or with digital media outside of the e-commerce and the data analytics? Perhaps maybe we can spend a bit of time that you see that might be interesting opportunity for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is owning the customer relationship, making sure that the brands specifically, and this is outside of even just media, you sell on Amazon today, you don't know who that customer is. Like that's Amazon's customer. You sell through the App Store, that's Apple's customer at that point. And you're seeing more brands in particular trying to develop that direct relationship, especially in the media industry where you have NBC and HBO and others creating their own standalone products that they can sell directly to those consumers. Back in the day, it used to be, 3 channels, 1 show, and you'd get 30 million people watching it because there was only 1 show to watch at that time. And if you wanted to watch TV, that was the show you're watching. Now there's so many different choices that you've gone from 1 show to many shows, from linear TV to the internet to mobile viewing and smart TVs, and it's going to continue to progress as we get into more augmented reality experiences. So I think, recognize those consumption patterns. They follow where fans and where others are actually trying to get content. I don't think, TVs, at least in the future 10, 20 years, I think TVs are still going to be a thing. They've looked at trying to replace them with 3D and VR and other things. Like those will be supplements, but I think for the most part, you're going to still see televisions. And the other piece that I think is important to keep in mind is just the measurable trends of your marketing. And you think back to, when the Yellow Pages was the big marketing channel for everybody. It was how many A's can you get in your name, so when someone looked up a plumber, that your name was the first one that they saw. And it's not like that anymore. You need to own that relationship with the customer, so you can build a database, so who more customers that look like that audience that you can go after and try to get them to come in and be a part of what you're trying to sell as a service or a product, and figuring out tactics around that. It's allowing people to be much more efficient with their spend in some regards, and that's the whole crux of brand marketing versus direct marketing, and so I think you're seeing that just a big focus on understanding who that person is and who that customer is extremely important.
Yeah. So, and we had one question in which I think to some extent has sort of been threaded through all of your comments, which is a question about versatility. And I think one of you talked about generalization. And the question essentially was, has versatility and generalization become more important than specialization was 10, 15 years ago? And I think you 100% said yes. I think all of you in a different guise to our question from Lauren, that absolutely versatility, agility, flexibility are probably more critical than they've ever been in our industry. I want to get into some really, obviously questions coming in much more around the process. So let me throw the sort of red meat in: cover letters. Does anybody read a cover letter? Are they worth writing? And if so, what should you put in them? I'm going to start with Kathy, if that's okay. You probably read hundreds in your time.
I was actually going to raise my hand for that question. For us, the cover letter is part of a story, right? So to build off that theme of storytelling, you're telling a story, when you're marketing to a consumer. But when you are marketing yourself to an employer, you're also telling a story. The first part of that story is the resume. So the resume, with modern technology that all employers have, the ATS or applicant tracking systems, there are sophisticated technologies that help recruiters sort through people who meet sort of the minimum requirements. But what the cover letter does, it helps, create those storytelling threads that we might not necessarily see in the resume. If we're not really seeing all the things that you did, working for this nonprofit where you volunteered, right? You might not have that all on your resume, but that might be the story that we need to hear. That might be the story that's going to set you apart from any other candidates in our system. And so, it's important that you're thinking about that story, make it concise, but also make it personalized. When we think of marketing to consumer, it's about personalization and customization. When you are self-branding, you need to target it to that job. My team doesn't want to see a standard blanket cover letter where it's copy and paste J&J for L'Oreal. We want to see that you read that job description, that you are tailoring your talking points to resonate with that consumer. And when we see those cover letters, that actually helps us determine, I'm going to take that resume and move it to start assessment, because that will be one of the ways you can set yourself apart in the process.
I'm going to agree with Kathy on that one. I think that, the cover letter, the resume is where I start. You look at the companies, the titles, and some of the bullets maybe of what they've done. You can scan the resume pretty quickly. And again, it's not necessarily that, if you don't get a call, it might not be because you're not qualified. It just might be, again, that role, you need a very specific skill set, or you might need something specific for that role to complement the other team members that are already there. So don't always take it as like, man, why didn't I get a call? Because I didn't, my title matches perfectly with this, or my previous experience matches perfectly. You don't know what's going on internally, but it's true. The story of the cover letter can help sell or fill in those gaps that you might question. And it also is the work that you put in towards getting that job, right? If I read a resume and it looks good, or maybe if it looks good, maybe I'm just going to give you a call and it lines up. Maybe if I'm on the fence and I read the cover letter, that pushes me over, and then I make that call. So it definitely is a bonus in that regard, as kind of like to me, a little bit of a fail-safe if you're on the fence in terms of meeting the qualifications that I'm looking for as a hiring manager.
Let's turn a little bit to the resume piece of the equation as well. A few questions coming in about, what needs to go on a resume. One question around, are there keywords that, really stand out? Or another question was around, are there 3 to 5 mandatory things that must go on a resume? And clearly, we all know these things are job specific, context specific, etc. But any guidance, and maybe you can tell some tales in terms of sort of epic fails, but what do you see working well on resumes? Could even be comments about format, if you like, and things that you think sort of tend to, force more questions than answers. Anybody, welcome to jump in.
I'll throw two. I mean, photos, we don't need them on the resume. And then just, more than, to me at least. And then on top of that, especially if you're early in your career, I don't need like 3, 4, 5, 6 pages. Like that gets too much, right? Like, 1, 2 pages. I think especially as you get bigger in your career and elevated, 2 pages becomes more acceptable. If not, 3 from there. You can always bring in more documents or more information to supplement that if you get that interview. But that's the first step that I would see as the resume portion of it. So more than, I guess to put a finer point on it, more than 2 pages and a photo, that's what I would avoid.
Yeah, and I mean, I just to add to that, because this is, I violently agree with everything that's been said. When I look at resumes, I make sure there are no gaps. So don't leave a year or 2 without an explanation if you possibly can, because that immediately raises a little bit of a red flag in a hiring manager. And I think, particularly in the field of public relations, as was mentioned earlier, writing is so essential. And if there is an error in the resume, if it's structurally and from a format perspective, it's not looking good, that is a problem. It's not a deal breaker, but it's not an advantage to go in with a resume with any errors in it at all.
I think less is more with resumes. 2 pages maximum. I like to see white space. I like the formatting. There's a confidence in not just listing your rules and responsibilities that you worked on. I want to see tangible achievements. I want to see responsibilities. We know what you do on a day-to-day basis. So I want to see what what impact you made, and responsibilities, and if you're on the agency side, clients that you've worked for. And yeah, look, I mean, it shocks me the lack of attention to detail sometimes with resumes as well. I mean, recently I thought it was a joke at first. Someone had misspelled copywriter and as one of their job titles, and I thought maybe it was like a are you reading this properly kind of thing, but no, they'd spelled copywriter wrong. So attention to detail is so important. Yeah.
That's actually very meta. Yeah, that's very meta.
I thought it was. At first, I thought maybe they're making me think about it, but no. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So, any just to stay on resumes, sort of little prosaic, but there's always debate about whether you should have one of those sort of statements up front about, I'm a fast thinking, fast talking digital executive who ... Do you like them? Do you not like them? Do they add anything?
I like a couple of lines. Yeah, I think I like to have a little bit of an introduction. 2 lines, 2 paragraphs max, but I like that. And I'm not against a picture either, but I default to LinkedIn now before resume, to be honest. So
right.
Resume is essential, but I'll go straight to LinkedIn often with people because it's interactive. It allows, you can, I don't know that school, I'll click on that school, or I didn't, I haven't heard of that business. So it's interactive. So obviously you can't give away everything on LinkedIn, but it should be as up to date and informative as your resume as you can. No doubt about that.
I want to pick up one comment Jen made because there was a question about it, and then I think let's pivot to LinkedIn and talk about LinkedIn and social media and how to use that effectively. But one question, Jennifer, was, let's say you do have a gap. How do you justify? How can you explain that gap? Life sometimes throws you a lemon, and things happen. And what do you think some of the best way or things you've seen to sort of manage those gaps or explain those gaps?
Yeah, what I will say is, regardless what the gap was, to be able to put something in there that just gives a short explanation. Obviously, as an interviewer, as a person who's hiring, I don't want to intrude on things, but to say, I took time off to be with family or for family reasons, for example, right? That's plenty for me. You know, if I want to go a little deeper, I'll say, you know, did you come out of that with a different life experience, if it's relevant to the job, or else I simply won't inquire. So all I'm saying is just don't leave, you know, nature abhors a vacuum, right? If there's a vacuum in the resume without anything, then it's too tempting for the people who are reviewing it to go, well, this is a problem, when it might not be a problem at all. You were doing something, and that's okay.
So I think we can talk a little bit about LinkedIn and social media, if you don't mind, and we'll keep, again, if you we'll keep going. I recognize we're sort of at beyond the 12:30 mark, but we'll keep going for you know, maybe till 12:45. And talk a bit about LinkedIn, social media, and then maybe some of the mechanics of looking for jobs. Obviously, a lot of folks have questions about, you know, how do I get an internship at X or Y or Z? And you know, maybe there are some good resources out there, not just for your own company. So what about the use of social media? I think everybody sort of recognizes LinkedIn is critical. So perhaps some thoughts about what should go up there, and especially where you feel as a young person, maybe you don't have a lot to demonstrate for yourself, or as an international student, perhaps your experience might not be, or your education even might not be as well known to someone looking at you. So thoughts about LinkedIn and or other thoughts about, you know, how to use and how not to use social media. You want to take that?
I think, I mean, I mentioned LinkedIn, as I said, it's vital, I think. And I mean, it might not be everyone's default, but is where I go immediately. And, you know, I'm very active on it myself. And it's great for research and the like, but you know, I think it's very, very important to be up. It allows you to, you know, it allows you to do more things than just put up where you work. You can publish stuff, you can blog on there, you can network, of course, as well. There's, you know, there's a host of business people on there and commentators and like. So it's a real, you know, I'm a big fan of it from a business perspective. Other social media, I think. If you're working in influencer marketing and like, I think it's important to have a presence on the likes of Instagram. I think a bit of a hidden gem, particularly in marketing and communications, is Twitter. I think I don't know many CEOs of agencies or heads of marketing and comms department that don't have a presence on Twitter, and it's probably not as overused. So you can probably get within reason. You can probably get some quite prominent industry people's attention via Twitter. I'm not claiming I'm prominent or important in the industry, but I know, for example, I've had a few candidates reach out to me via that after doing stuff like this and saying, "Hey, Jamie, like that, you know, can we get in touch?" and stuff like that. So, and it's because I don't get that much influx on there compared to the likes of LinkedIn. It's you know, it is I think it's a useful tool, and it's great for following industry and following news and seeing what's going on and seeing what people are saying. So I think Twitter's a little bit of a hidden gem, LinkedIn essential, and then other stuff like Instagram and Facebook. I'm not sure, you know, how that I mean, that can help businesses, but I'm not sure how it helps individuals in business unless it's actually your business.
Yep.
So to
Okay.
build that, I'd love to share a piece of advice to anyone who's thinking about their digital brand. Google yourself. Just Google yourself. See what comes up. See what social accounts are publicly accessible for you. See if LinkedIn is indexing high. See who else has your name and might be indexing higher than you if you have a very common name. I'll give you an example. I thought my name was pretty unique until I Googled myself for the first time, and the leading person on page one was somebody who was a runner in California who had won lots of awards. So she was indexing higher than I was. Okay, fine, you know, but it's important to know what your publicly accessible profile is across all of these platforms, and make decisions, make conscious decisions, particularly with Instagram, on whether that is a public profile or a private. Because if you Google yourself and you have images out there from events that you may not want an employer to know about, make it private. I know a lot of people, experienced professionals who are now starting sort of their public Instagram account and then their private one, who have shut down Facebook to make sure that it's their private network of friends, because all of your digital data has a life, and it lives on beyond what you can imagine. So, please make sure that you're attending to this, you're understanding what is publicly accessible to you, and then make those strategic decisions about all of your communications online, because they have a very long afterlife.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I want to direct us just a couple of minutes. We've had enough technological gremlins today. I want to make sure we stay within the the limits before the gremlins revisit us. But thoughts for our students and young professionals on the call about where to look for jobs, or really sort of network into jobs, and obviously if there a couple of you sort of represent companies that are generally employing, if there are places where you would direct folks, what's your best advice about staying current on the job opportunities?
I'll jump in. I mean, I think it's a very difficult. It's obviously a very difficult market at the moment, particularly at the junior level. The market is picking up. There is no doubt about that. But it's not, it's not like it was this time last year, and it's certainly a tough market, particularly for graduates or people with more junior experience. So my advice on that would be is back to Jed's advice: take something, keep that resume ticking over as well, and then make part of the role into marketing and or communications. There's even if you're working at a small local store, they probably need some marketing assistance or some communications assistance. So while you're looking for the dream job, keep the resume ticking over, keep yourself in the game, and then maybe develop make part of that role marketing, make part of that role communications. Even if if you're volunteering again for a foundation or the local dog's home, or again, ask them, have you thought about marketing? Have you thought about PR and comms? And then you can add that to the resume, and then start to build up a cause for when you get that top job. And I think as an employer and as someone that finds people jobs, if I saw someone take that kind of impetus to do that, then I'd be very, very impressed as well. So that would be my advice in a market particularly like this.
Yeah, and
Phenomenal.
I couldn't agree more. And what I would add to that as well is that actually now that everything's virtual, particularly if you're not located in a big city where, often companies have orientations for potential candidates, or they go to schools and they give presentations, all of that is going to start to go online. So stay clued in, because you may have, you may not be in the right location physically, but you're in the right location virtually. So pay attention as those things get momentum. I think Kathy probably has more thoughts on this. As these big companies start to reach out again, start to get momentum, in terms of just letting people know what they're about, be there.
Yeah, and what about, Kathy, resources? When L'Oreal posts jobs, have you found places beyond your own website that you think tend to attract good candidates? Are there places that you would counsel folks? I know a lot of industries have their own sort of sub. I think there was Velvet Jobs was one, I think, in the fashion and beauty industry for a while. Any tips? Any places that perhaps candidates haven't thought of looking?
So, I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Glassdoors, the Indeed, sort of the job aggregators. LinkedIn is also another job aggregator. So, have your sort of short list of companies that you set alerts for, right? Make sure you have a profile on their career site, but then also get the aggregators in the mix to see what else is out there. But sometimes the way to connect to a job is actually through your network. And specifically, the alumni network of universities are such a rich wealth. And that is a great way to create an affiliation to someone in a role, in a job. You might have no other connection. You're interested in that company, but your university, that affiliation, that passion for the university can really help bridge. And that introduction would stick out, you know, that person makes that connection, it sticks out. The job may not be posted now, but they'll remember they made that connection with a smart NYU student who could potentially fill that role, and will reach back out. So, you know, continue to leverage your network, continue to leverage your alumni association, your student connections to find those potential opportunities before they may even be posted.
Yeah, I'll add, I mean, I think, you know, I can remember hiring one of my former students for a entry-level project job for 10 months at the NBA. LinkedIn, you know, I spoke at Cornell Tech, and actually I hired 2 people from my team, one that approached me after that event and kept in touch after she took a job in between. And then another who, you know, the professor of that class shared a job posting that I made on LinkedIn, and one of his former students reached out, and both have been amazing hires. So you never know where it's going to come from, but you have to keep your eyes open. And look, there's times I post things for the NBA, and you get a lot of people who'd be like, that'd be fantastic. And I get very little traction on it, you know, and again, you don't know specifically why or what, you know, maybe it's too generalist with the role than some people are used to, but there are opportunities out there. You just have to really keep your eyes open, and you have to do the legwork. You got to figure out like what you want to do, who the people are in similar roles to the areas that you're in. And we all want to find great candidates. It's not about, you know, you want to find right fits for these roles. And if you're that person, it's not annoying or you know, bothering someone. We'd rather have these, you know, this larger network to be able to find really good people for the roles.
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces of advice we give folks, and I know my colleagues at Wasserman would echo this, is it's sometimes slightly uncomfortable when you're networking to send someone an email and say, I want a job, you know. But if you send someone, you know, a LinkedIn request or an email that's, hey, I've been thinking about your industry and I saw this thing happening, or this seems quite fascinating, or I've been working on this project I thought it might be interesting for you, or I just saw this incredible report, I don't know if you've seen it. You know, my sense is that, you know, that sort of, you know, I think we've called it do it to be it a little bit, you know, that when you find people who are a bit more interactive with you or engaged, that's a more attractive quality, something you can handle more. So I tell you what, guys, I do want to be conscious of everybody's time. I think this is a rich discussion that could go on much longer. I want to assure everybody on the phone or on the webinar that we have recorded and we will distribute the video. And I think we'll probably append that some good resources that we have at the school for some of the questions that have been asked in the chat that I think we won't be able to get to. But, you know, I would like on behalf of all of the audience and certainly the school to thank you, all 4 of you, quite profoundly for joining us. It's been a rich and engaging conversation. I only wish we had had a chance to start it right on time and go all the way through. And I assume I can encourage everyone who's listening in, if they want to reach you, to find you on LinkedIn and to sort of reach out and start practicing some of those good skills. And indeed, if you any of you have some incremental material that you'd love us to share, you know, about thinking about careers at L'Oreal or Ogilvy, MBA, or in general, we can package that together and get it back out to everybody who registered and attended. But anyway, my sincere thanks. Very fun to have the conversation with you all, and wish you well.
Thank you.
Many thanks. Bye-bye, guys. Bye.
Thanks all.